and had one request which myself and Councillor Bartley have accepted, and that's from Business North Harbour. Tony Garnier and others, Kevin O'Leary, General Manager at Business North Harbour, Peter Lamberton, the Executive Chair there, and we'll be hearing from them shortly. Then we'll go to local board input, and we'll be hearing from Ōrākei Local Board, represented by Member Troy Churton, and that relates to helicopters. So we'll take the public input first, then local board input, and then members. I don't have any extraordinary items, so I'll address that one now. But what I was proposing to do was take the business, a lot of quite procedural business around plan changes, and I thought we'll just get that out of the way first, and I think our staff from Plans and Places will be here a little bit earlier so we can deal with those items, and then we'll come back and deal with items 8 and 9, and that's the Land Transport Rail Legislation Bill and the Kāinga Ora second bill, the Urban Development Bill. I hope that's to everybody's agreement, and we shall proceed and hear from Business North Harbour. And I welcome the representatives to the table, please. Sorry, and I should have said, and supported by Tony Garnier, but I do welcome Kevin O'Leary and Peter Lamberton.
Yeah, thank you. Marina, so Kevin and I are here today representing Business North Harbour. Talk? Right, sorry. Marina, Kevin and I are here today representing Business North Harbour, and we're a business improvement district. And our purpose is to empower economic prosperity and growth for our members. Next slide, please. Yep, thank you. And one of the ways we do this is through advocacy for our members to central and local government to achieve outcomes we believe align with our purpose. But we have been moderately successful in this regard. You may be surprised to know that there are 48 bids in Auckland alone, and thus as much as we want to have a seat at the table of influence, we can't. We are simply not big enough, nor influential enough. We want that to change, and our members agree. The question is how. The problem we were attempting to solve is this: what organisation represented wider North Shore issues that we could align with to more powerfully represent our views on matters of advocacy? And after quite a bit of research, the answer was none. It appeared not to exist, despite the North Shore representing 24% of Auckland's population. Hence, Bridge to the Future was born. Next slide, thanks. Identifying that such an organisation did not exist, we formulated a plan to investigate whether there was a need for such an organisation. We engaged Tony Garnier to speak with key stakeholders in an attempt to understand two things. Was it required, or were we solving a problem which simply did not exist? And that was the scope of stage 1, which is the report that we produced. The report contains a lot of information which was gathered through the process, much of which you will be familiar with. But in summary, the consensus of key stakeholders was yes, it is absolutely required. To clarify, this organisation will be completely independent of Business North Harbour. It will stand and govern in its own right. Having identified a clear need, we move to stage 2, with the consent of our members, which involves understanding how the organisation should be structured, who will be involved, how it will be funded, and importantly, what are the expected outcomes. This is currently a work in progress, and we don't have the answers yet, but we should by September this year. Next slide, thanks. So what does success look like? Firstly, key stakeholders engage with the concept and willingly become involved. Secondly, the organisation is self-funding. It won't be funded on an ongoing basis by Business North Harbour, most likely by those parties who are interested in being involved. Thirdly, the organisation is externally recognised as the leading authority on North Shore issues. And finally, local and central government actively look to engage with the organisation in due course. This success can only be achieved if the organisation is clear on its purpose and outcomes. But importantly, all parties who are involved act in the best interest of the wider North Shore and Auckland City more generally, and do not bring any agenda they may have to the table. Next slide. So what we want you to remember, it will take time before we understand if this project has a long-term future. Sitting here today, we don't know, but we have given ourselves 12 months to find out. The second thing we wish you to remember is that we want to work collaboratively and be seen as a partner of choice with Auckland Council, Auckland Transport and other relevant organisations. Final slide, thanks. We're very pleased to be representing the concept to Council. However, there is also feedback that we require from you to ensure that we have the best chance of creating something of use. Specifically, what information or involvement could this organisation provide that would be valuable and meaningful to Auckland Council? And secondly, what does success of this organisation look like to you? Not from our perspective, but yours. We have copies of the Stage 1 report on hand for those interested, and it can be accessed via the Business North Harbour website, and it contains a lot of information. However, we've decided to keep our messaging simple in the interest of time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Members, questions at this point? Councillor Watson?
First of all, I'd like to compliment you on your excellent discussion document. It really is first rate and certainly spells out, I think, the need for the sort of organisation you're describing here today, given the population dynamics at work. I mean, the North Shore is going to be up to nearly 600,000 people very soon. And there is a real need to tie all these different strands together, employment, infrastructure, business development, etc. So I guess my question to you is that, in light of, the very clear need on a number of levels here, and not least of which is these transformative elements that are required to keep the North Shore growing and meeting the needs of its people. As far as the organisation goes, from your sector, do you see any problem in accessing the kind of calibre of person to tie this together, to help Council with its job, and Council does tend to operate in silos at times, but to bring it all together for this massive big area, do you see any challenges with getting that kind of calibre of person together to add real value to this, really clear vision that would be of great benefit to our area?
I think that's a great question, and I think Stage 1 report, that was exactly what it was designed to do. It was, if ultimately we're solving a problem that doesn't exist and no one's interested in it, it will discontinue. But the parties that we've spoken to have shown quite a lot of interest and are keen to be involved. So that's where Stage 2 is quite important. It's like, who are those parties, what are the requisite skill sets that we need, and what involvement will they have and how will it work? So some of those questions I don't know the answer to, but based on the feedback that we have had, and we provided a copy of the report to everyone who we consulted with for further feedback, I honestly don't believe we'll have any problem getting the calibre of people who we're after, because ultimately if we don't get those people and the decision makers, then it's probably unlikely it will ever achieve its full potential. So,
just to add to that, on Friday I presented the report to the local board chairs and deputies from 4 of our 5 local boards. Unfortunately, Councillor Sayers may be aware, the Rodney representatives couldn't get there, but they're keen for me to go and present to them, and we had overwhelming support from all the 4 local boards that turned up as to what we're trying to do, and some significant businesses who it was felt by some of the members attending may well be interested in this, are already going to be spoken to in the near future, just to see if we can again continue to gain momentum.
Questions, members? Councillor Walker.
Just want to follow on from Councillor Watson. Quite obviously, I'd certainly suggest that there's a need for an organisation. I would hope that you're able to make a start, and would emphasise that making a start may in itself answer some of the other questions. Quite often, you know, you can't send a rocket up straight away. There's a lot of things that need to be done to put the launch pad into place. But I would certainly suggest that at the very least, what we need across council and across Auckland is a much more evidence-based approach to how we do things. And quite often we lack that evidence base on a geographical basis, and certainly the North Shore is a geographically identifiable area that has got a number of things that it requires. So I'd certainly invite a response from you
Councillor,
around
I do need the
making a
question to
start.
come now.
So the question was around taking an organic approach, making a start on the basis that you may not be able to do everything at once.
Yeah, I think we have to be incredibly clear on what the initial outcome is going to be, because if we don't have clarity, I think it's hard for people to follow in terms of what you're trying to achieve. So that will be one of the key things that we're doing realistically over the next couple of months, is getting clarity on what the outcomes will be. And I kind of like a simple concept. I don't want really more than about 3 to start with. And it will develop from there, because the reality is, once we get, assuming we can get the calibre of the people that we're interested in too, it will probably take a different tack from what I think it may do just sitting here. So you're right, organically it will grow, but sometimes you just have to do and start, and I think that's where we are. But we're also conscious that we're a bid, so we have support from our members because they think this is an excellent opportunity for us to push advocacy, but we're also wary that it's probably stepping slightly outside what our remit is, and funding is being directed outside the immediate bid area for a greater purpose. And so the members are very closely looking at also what the objectives are and how successful it will be. So we've got a reporting mechanism back to them, which we're very conscious of.
Okay, other questions, members? So just to follow us a little bit more, what is your request here today? I'm just trying to get to the nub of it. I know that you've had discussions with some local boards, and you'll continue to have those discussions. And you're talking about the North Shore area. You're currently Business North Harbour, but you're looking for deeper and wider advocacy opportunities.
Correct.
And so you really see yourself encompassing a wider catchment to do that. So just give us a bit of background on the discussions you've had with the other business improvement districts, and there are a number of them in the north.
So we've consulted with the other business districts, but this isn't a collaborative approach with them per se. So basically, it stemmed from how can we best advocate. And it all stemmed from the fact that if I'm Auckland Council, why would I want to hear from Business North Harbour? The reality is, I probably wouldn't. I'm one of, a number of people. So how do we make our advocacy considerably stronger? And I think the conclusion we came to, it has to be an organisation which represents the wider North Shore interest. And so that's what it's trying to achieve. And so I guess what are we looking for here today? It was the feedback in terms of slide 6 around what is it that you would want from such an organisation, because it's only when you start to engage with it that we have a seat at the table, and then we potentially can influence and add value to our members.
I think as well, Chris, just a bit more background. I'm actually hosting a meeting of all the bid managers over the next 10 days. I'm just in the process of arranging that. I've already spoken to Terence at Takapuna, and he's fully behind what we're trying to do. Some of the smaller bids, if I'm honest, I can't say anyone objecting to it. I think a lot of the smaller bids will be happy just to go, okay, that sounds great, and let us get on with it. But again, I'm happy to report back to this committee if required moving forward.
Look, I think this probably needs to be progressed from you, and I'm sure you'll find staff. I forget the identity of the individual that heads up our bids. It might be Paul Thompson.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you'll have a sounding board there to look at how our staff can support you within the parameters of the funding, obviously, and that's the challenge the individual bids have as well, that you're making clear here today. So I'm sure that we will be able to offer you a level of support so that you can take the lead in working this up. But it probably is best led from the field rather than led by council. I think that is
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
that is the way you're intending it to be.
And ultimately, Chris, basically what we were looking for from this group was it's more a question of how we can possibly help whatever it is you're planning for the North Shore and doing it in a coordinated, collaborative manner. And again, if we can get a groundswell of support from within the region to support what you're trying to do, then that's, again, what's the major outcome that we're looking for.
Okay. I've got questions further from Councillor Hills first and then Councillor Dalton.
Thank you. And yeah, it sounds like a great idea. Just a quick comment before my questions is that, you know, we do as council, especially locally, but wider the Auckland, get a lot of advocacy groups, lots. So I guess for me, my opinion would be, and to ask you, you know, how do you ensure this is not just another voice that's already doing a lot of other things? How do you make sure you're not using resources doubling up, and how do you make sure that you're actually speaking on behalf of the bid? So you said it's not necessarily collaborative that you wanted it to be, but those business associations, I imagine, and bids will still be speaking on behalf of their members and maybe contradicting you. So that's my question on how you ensure that there's a solid point to it for the wider North Shore interest. And the other one is, how do you represent the interests? So you talk about this as of the bridge to the future. How do you ensure your advocacy is for the future, so maybe younger people and things who aren't necessarily connected into your... So how do you balance the current needs versus the future needs? And yeah, because we have to think about, obviously our plans are often 10 to 20 years out, as opposed to issues that may be right now.
And I think that's exactly why we thought about setting this organisation up, is we want a similar time horizon, because we've had some major infrastructural projects which have directly affected our bid, and our ability to influence what we consider to be at the last minute, which in some cases can be 12 months out, is not enough. We need to be involved earlier and sooner. And so if we can create something, and this is where it's important that if you don't find it useful in some way, shape or form, then ultimately it will be doomed to failure and it will just be discontinued. In terms of, yes, there are a lot of organisations out there which, and I'm sure there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds who come through and want advocacy, but I guess there is nothing on the North Shore that represents a unified central view, and we want to try and formulate that. And that's why it's critical that if people become involved, irrespective of where they are from or what their vested interest may be, it's going to have to be parked at the door, and it's like, is this the best for the wider North Shore? And we've got to take a much bigger view than just that. And so just to clarify too, when this organisation, we might be part of it, but ultimately we would see it just being a completely standalone entity that potentially we have nothing to do with. So it's just formulating it, facilitating it, and then see where the cards lie post that period.
Thank you. Look, I'll take one last question, because I have given member Troy Churton assurance that we will be finished with his item by 10:50. He has another engagement that he told us about, so we need to make sure that he is free by then. Councillor Dalton, finally.
Thank you, Chair. You might have just answered my question. I was just trying to get the setup of it all. So you're a bid.
Yeah.
Yes.
There are other bids.
Yes.
And what you're saying is that we think there's a place for a unified voice for the whole of the shore.
Yes, correct.
And this is a collaborative approach with all of those other bids as well. And your question is this of value to council? Have you taken advice from the bid team in terms of that higher hierarchy of that unified voice as to what support they would give?
Yeah, so we spoke to Paul Thompson. We ran the basically ran the idea past him. He felt it was, again, a very worthwhile approach. And again, his suggestion was, as has been alluded this morning, getting all the other bids involved. As I've already said, some of them will come to the table, some won't have the time or resource, but as long as we get their mandate and just keep them in the loop, then we see this as a really useful collaboration. So Paul and Claire are well aware of what we're doing.
Yeah, they are, but also just to clarify, this organisation isn't set just to represent the collective view of the bids, and Kevin and I are discussing it. We would expect that there would only be one bid on that committee, and they would, you know, whether they represent the collective view of all bids is, I guess it's unclear, and potentially they would not, but that is just one party at the table. And so the other part, so in fact, we wouldn't want to put more than sort of, you know, one industry group within that committee, because they'll carry then too much weight, I believe. So.
Yeah. So overall, we're looking at, as well as bid representation, we're looking at local board representation, ideally, some of the bigger businesses.
You know, someone from health, someone from education, perhaps Massey University.
Yeah.
You know, so it's bringing in, you know, all key factors.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton, and thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And we appreciate that update. All support to you in your endeavours to congeal this and bring it together. Please keep us informed.
Lovely. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion there. Would somebody like to move? Councillor Watson, Councillor Walker moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you. Takes us to local board